My son smiled and asked me to sign his birthday card. 30 seconds later, I realized I had almost signed away everything my late husband had spent 43 years building. I didn't know it then, but that simple afternoon would divide my life into two parts. Before I trusted my family without question, and after I finally saw them for who they really were. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end of my story, and tell me what city you're listening from, because I'd truly like to know how far this story travels. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 72 years old, and until that birthday party, I believe the greatest blessing in life was watching your children grow into successful adults. My husband, William, and I had spent decades building a comfortable life in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. William had passed away 2 years earlier after a long battle with heart disease. Every morning since then, I'd still pour 2 cups of coffee before remembering I only needed one. Grief never really disappears. It simply becomes quieter. That Saturday afternoon was my son Daniel's 44th birthday. Nicole, my daughter-in-law, insisted on hosting the celebration at their beautiful home across town. She had called me 3 different times that week, reminding me not to be late because Daniel had planned something special. Hearing those words warmed my heart. My son had been working long hours at his engineering firm, and we hadn't spent much time together recently. I baked his favorite pecan pie from scratch that morning, just like I had every birthday since he turned 12. As I carried it through the front door, my grandson Tyler rushed over and hugged me. "Grandma, Dad's been waiting for your pie," he shouted with genuine excitement. That simple embrace reminded me that children still recognized love before adults complicated everything. The house smelled of grilled steaks and fresh bread. Laughter echoed from the backyard where neighbors and relatives gathered around the patio. Daniel walked toward me, wearing the same easy smile that had melted my heart since the day he was born. He kissed my cheek and thanked me for coming. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again. Nicole appeared beside him carrying a silver envelope that looked much thicker than an ordinary greeting card. The paper was expensive, the kind sold in specialty stationery shops. She smiled politely, but there was something rehearsed about it, as though she had practiced the expression in front of a mirror. "Evelyn," she said sweetly, "before we cut the cake, Daniel has one little birthday tradition he'd like you to help with." Daniel nodded. "Mom, I wanted everyone I love to sign my birthday card this year. Something I can keep forever." I laughed softly. "That's a lovely idea." Nicole immediately opened the envelope and unfolded several pages attached to a clipboard. My smile faded for just a second. "That's quite a large birthday card," I joked. Nicole chuckled a little too quickly. "We wanted everyone to have plenty of room to write." She handed me a pen already uncapped. "Just sign right here at the bottom." I adjusted my reading glasses. The print looked unusually small. "Maybe I should find better lighting," I said. Nicole gently touched my elbow before I could move. "Oh, don't worry about reading it. It's just birthday wishes. Everyone already signed." Daniel glanced toward the patio where guests were waiting. "Come on, Mom. Everybody's getting hungry." I looked around. Several relatives were watching. My sister-in-law smiled impatiently. Someone joked that I was probably writing Daniel another one of my famous long letters. I felt embarrassed for delaying the celebration. I lowered the pen toward the signature line. Just then, Tyler raced through the dining room, chasing his younger cousin with a plastic water gun. He bumped the edge of the table. A glass of iced tea tipped over. Amber-colored liquid spread across the papers before Nicole grabbed them. "Tyler," she snapped, far harsher than the situation deserved. As she hurriedly lifted the pages, the wet paper separated for a split second. My eyes landed on bold black letters printed near the top of one page. "Power of attorney." My hand froze. I stared at the words, wondering if grief had somehow affected my vision. Nicole immediately folded the papers closed and pressed them against her chest. Her smile returned, but this time it looked strained. "It's nothing important," she said. "Just some paperwork that accidentally got mixed in." Daniel frowned slightly. "Can we just keep things moving?" One of his friends laughed from across the room. "Looks like Grandma doesn't trust anybody anymore." Another voice added with a chuckle, "Maybe she can't read without a magnifying glass." A few people laughed politely. Heat rose into my cheeks. I forced myself to smile because I refused to make my son's birthday uncomfortable. Still, something inside me had shifted. William had always warned me never to sign anything without reading every word, no matter who placed it in front of me. I slowly set the pen on the table instead of the paper. Then, as Nicole tried to gather the damp pages, I noticed a familiar name printed near the bottom corner. Thomas Reed, my late husband's attorney. My heartbeat slowed instead of racing. William had trusted very few people in business. Thomas Reed was one of them. And if his name appeared on those papers, then whatever Nicole had called a birthday card was something far more serious than she wanted me to believe. That I smiled through the rest of Daniel's birthday party, but my mind never left those 3 words I had glimpsed through the spilled tea. Power of attorney. Nicole acted as though nothing unusual had happened. She laughed with the guests, refilled glasses, cut slices of cake, and wrapped one arm around Daniel whenever anyone congratulated him on another successful year. If I hadn't seen those words myself, I might have convinced myself that I was imagining things. But I had spent 43 years married to William Harper, a man who built a construction company from a pickup truck and a toolbox. He taught me that important documents never appeared by accident inside greeting cards. They appeared because someone wanted a signature before questions could be asked. That evening, after everyone finished eating, I quietly carried my empty pie dish into Nicole's kitchen. She followed a few seconds later. "Thank you again for coming, Evelyn," she said with her polished smile. Daniel was so happy. I nodded. "Nicole, what exactly was that paperwork?" She didn't hesitate. "Insurance forms. Daniel's financial planner dropped them off yesterday, and they somehow got mixed into the birthday card." She reached for the sink without looking at me. Honestly, it was embarrassing. Her explanation sounded prepared, almost too smooth. "Then why not simply let me read it?" I asked gently. She shrugged while rinsing a plate. "Because everyone was waiting for cake. It wasn't worth wasting time over." Before I could answer, Daniel stepped into the kitchen. "Everything okay?" Nicole smiled before I had a chance to speak. "Your mother thinks I almost tricked her into signing paperwork." Daniel sighed with a tired laugh. "Mom, Nicole handles everything around here. You don't have to worry about every little thing." The words weren't cruel, but they settled heavily in my chest. There had been a time when Daniel would have asked what made me uncomfortable. Instead, he dismissed the feeling before hearing the reason. I simply picked up my pie dish and told them I'd better head home before it grew too late. Daniel hugged me at the front door. Nicole waved from behind him. Tyler ran out to the driveway and hugged me one more time. "Love you, Grandma." "I love you too, sweetheart," I whispered. His hug felt genuine in a house where almost everything else suddenly felt rehearsed. The drive home to my little brick ranch took nearly 40 minutes. Autumn leaves drifted across the empty roads, and the radio played songs William used to hum while driving us through Ohio every October. I turned the radio off. Silence gave me room to think. The more I replayed the afternoon, the more details refused to fit together. Nicole had already uncapped the pen before handing it to me. The signature line had been marked with a yellow tab. She had discouraged me from finding better light. Daniel had urged me to hurry. Then, after the tea spilled, Nicole hadn't worried about saving the birthday card. She had worried about hiding the pages. None of that felt accidental. I parked in my driveway just after 9. The porch light came on automatically, exactly as William had programmed it years ago. Walking inside always brought the same mixture of comfort and loneliness. His favorite recliner still faced the television. His reading glasses still rested on the bookshelf where I'd left them after sorting through his belongings. Some people told me I should move on and redecorate. I never saw the point. A home built with love deserved to keep its memories. I placed the pie dish on the counter and made myself a cup of chamomile tea. While waiting for the kettle to boil, I noticed something else that suddenly seemed strange. During the past 6 months, Nicole had insisted on helping me with almost everything involving paperwork. She offered to collect my mail whenever they visited. She often reminded me that online banking was safer than paper statements. More than once she had volunteered to organize my filing cabinet because, as she put it, important papers get confusing at your age. At the time I had considered it kindness. Tonight it felt different. I opened the small drawer beside my refrigerator where I kept incoming mail until I had time to sort it. There were only grocery coupons, a utility bill, and a church newsletter. Odd. I usually received at least one bank envelope each month. Had I simply forgotten opening them? Or had they stopped coming? I carried my tea into William's old study. His oak desk remained exactly as he had left it, except for one framed photograph of the two of us standing beside the very first company truck we ever owned. I sat down and slowly opened the middle drawer. Inside lay a leather notebook where William had written reminders before he passed away. Most pages contained measurements, appointments, and phone numbers. Near the back, folded carefully between two pages, was a yellow sticky note in his handwriting. It read, "Never sign anything you haven't read twice, especially if someone asks you to hurry." I smiled sadly. It sounded exactly like him. I closed the notebook and stared at the rain beginning to tap against the study window. Perhaps Nicole had told the truth. Perhaps I was allowing grief and loneliness to turn ordinary moments into suspicious ones. But another thought refused to leave me. If everything was innocent, why had I recognized Thomas Reed's name on those pages? Thomas had handled every legal matter for William for nearly 30 years. He would never prepare paperwork for Daniel without a reason. I reached for my address book, found Thomas Reed's office number, and wrote it on a notepad beside the telephone. It was nearly 10 o'clock, far too late to call. But as I switched off the study lamp and prepared for bed, I quietly promised myself one thing. Tomorrow morning, before speaking to Daniel or Nicole again, I was going to ask William's attorney exactly why his name had appeared inside what was supposed to be my son's birthday card. The next morning, I was standing outside First Federal Bank before the doors even opened. Columbus was just beginning to wake up. Commuters hurried toward downtown with coffee cups balanced in one hand and briefcases in the other, while I sat quietly on a wooden bench beneath a maple tree whose leaves had already begun turning bright shades of orange and gold. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nicole folding those damp pages before I could read them. I kept hearing William's voice reminding me that no honest document required urgency. At precisely 9 o'clock, the doors unlocked. Inside, the familiar scent of polished wood and fresh coffee greeted me. I had banked there for nearly 35 years. Several employees recognized me immediately. A young teller smiled warmly. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper. It's nice to see you again." I returned her smile. "Good morning. I'd like to speak with someone about my account if possible." A few minutes later, I was seated across from Melissa Grant, one of the senior account managers. She had helped William and me refinance one of our commercial properties years earlier. She shook my hand kindly. "How have you been, Evelyn?" "Managing," I answered honestly. "I actually have a question that may sound a little unusual." Melissa leaned forward. "Go ahead." I hesitated before speaking. "Has anyone made changes to my accounts recently? Any legal paperwork, powers of attorney, anything like that?" Her fingers paused above the keyboard. "May I verify your identification?" First, after checking my driver's license, she began reviewing my file. The room grew very quiet except for the soft clicking of her keyboard. Suddenly, her expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. She looked back at the screen, then at me. "Mrs. Harper," she said carefully, "weren't you here about 5 weeks ago?" My stomach tightened. "No." She frowned politely. "According to our records, you visited this branch and signed several authorization documents." I stared at her. "I've never been here in over 3 months." Melissa blinked twice, obviously uncertain. "Would you mind waiting one moment?" She excused herself and disappeared into a nearby office. When she returned, she carried a thin file folder. She placed it gently on the desk between us. "These are digital copies of the documents completed that afternoon." She turned the first page toward me. My name appeared neatly across the bottom. Evelyn Margaret Harper. The signature looked remarkably similar to mine. Almost perfect, but it wasn't mine. I felt strangely calm instead of frightened. I studied every curve of the handwriting. Whoever had copied my signature had practiced carefully, but they had made one mistake. I always looped the letter H in Harper slightly higher than the rest of the word. This signature didn't. "I didn't sign this," I said quietly. Melissa looked from the paper back to my face. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely." She swallowed slowly. "Then we have a serious problem." She opened another page showing several additional authorizations. None of them transferred ownership, but they granted broad financial access under certain circumstances. Someone had been laying the groundwork for much larger decisions. "Can you tell who brought these documents?" I asked. Melissa hesitated. "Normally, I wouldn't discuss another customer's visit, but if there's possible fraud involved." She clicked another screen. "The record indicates you weren't alone." My heartbeat slowed. "Who was with me?" She looked uncomfortable. "I can't identify someone without checking surveillance records." Before either of us spoke again, my cell phone vibrated across the desk. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I answered. Morning, Mom. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. Nicole said you left pretty upset yesterday. Everything okay? I glanced down at the forged signature. I'm at the bank. Silence followed. Then Daniel laughed awkwardly. The bank? Why? Because I have questions. His tone changed almost immediately. Mom, you don't need to make everything complicated. Nicole was telling the truth. Those papers were nothing important. Interesting, I replied quietly. I never told you what papers I'm asking about. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds longer this time. Finally, he sighed. I have a meeting. We'll talk later. He ended the call before I could answer. Melissa had heard only my side of the conversation, but it was enough. She closed the folder. Mrs. Harper, I think we should request our archived security footage. About 20 minutes later, a security supervisor joined us in a private office. The surveillance system had already overwritten most recordings from 5 weeks earlier, but still images attached to customer logs remained available. He opened the record connected to my account. A photograph appeared on the monitor. The woman standing at the customer service counter wore oversized sunglasses and a beige coat. She kept her head slightly lowered. From a distance, someone unfamiliar with me might have believed it was Evelyn Harper. I leaned closer. The build was wrong. The shoulders were narrower. The posture was younger. Then I noticed something unmistakable. Standing half a step behind the woman was Nicole. Her face was perfectly clear in the image. She wasn't signing anything. She was smiling at the employee across the counter. Melissa whispered, almost to herself, "That's the woman who accompanied your supposed visit." No one in the room spoke for several long moments. Finally, the supervisor said, "We'll need to begin an internal investigation immediately." I kept staring at Nicole's calm expression on the screen. She looked completely comfortable, as though she belonged there, as though she had absolutely nothing to hide. I thought back to every piece of mail she had offered to collect, every conversation she had redirected, every time she insisted she was only trying to make life easier for me. One memory after another settled into place like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was assembling. When I finally stood to leave, Melissa handed me her business card. "Please don't discuss this with anyone until we've completed our review," she said gently. I slipped the card into my purse and thanked her for treating me with respect. As I walked toward the parking lot, my phone rang once again. This time the caller ID displayed a name I hadn't seen in months. Thomas Reed. I pulled my car into an empty parking space before answering the call. "Thomas," I said, surprised. "It's been a while." His familiar voice came through the speaker, older than I remembered, but just as steady. "Good morning, Evelyn. I was hoping to catch you before anyone else did." That sentence immediately caught my attention. "What do you mean?" There was a brief pause. "Would you be willing to come by my office this afternoon? There's something your husband asked me to keep until the right moment." I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "Does this have anything to do with the paperwork I almost signed yesterday?" Thomas didn't answer directly. "Please come. Bring no one with you." His office occupied the second floor of a restored brick building near German Village, only a few miles from where William had opened his construction company decades earlier. Walking through those familiar doors brought back memories of happier years. William and I had sat in that waiting room countless times discussing business contracts, retirement plans, and eventually his estate after his heart condition worsened. Thomas himself greeted me before his receptionist could announce my arrival. His gray hair had become almost completely white, but his handshake remained firm. "It's good to see you, Evelyn. I wish it were under better circumstances," I admitted. He nodded solemnly and led me into his private office. After closing the door, he didn't begin with legal papers. Instead, he poured 2 cups of coffee exactly the way William liked it, black with no sugar. He always said serious. "Conversations deserved good coffee," Thomas said quietly. That simple remark almost brought tears to my eyes. We sat across from one another in silence for a moment before he unlocked a small fireproof cabinet behind his desk. From inside, he removed 2 sealed manila envelopes. One was empty except for a torn edge. The other remained sealed with William's signature across the flap. Thomas placed both on the desk between us. "Your husband prepared these about 6 months before he passed away." I looked at the handwriting immediately. There was no mistaking it. William's careful block letters covered the front. On the opened envelope, he had written, "To be delivered immediately after my death." On the sealed one, he had written, "Open only if Evelyn is pressured into signing documents she has not requested." I felt my breath catch. He actually wrote that? Thomas nodded. He insisted. I argued that it sounded overly cautious, but William trusted his instincts. My hands trembled slightly as Thomas slid the sealed envelope toward me. According to his instructions, the conditions have now been met. I carefully broke the seal. Inside rested 3 items: a handwritten letter, a small flash drive, and a folded legal memorandum bearing Thomas's signature. I unfolded the letter first. William's handwriting filled every line. My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, then someone has tried to convince you that urgency matters more than understanding. If that day ever comes, stop trusting smiles and start trusting questions. Never sign because someone says family should not need explanations. Honest people welcome questions. Dishonest people rush signatures. I had to stop reading for a moment. The words sounded exactly like the man I had loved for 43 years. Thomas waited patiently without interrupting. After taking a slow breath, I continued. William explained that as his illness progressed, he had noticed subtle conversations about finances occurring whenever people believed he was asleep. He never accused anyone directly because he lacked proof, but he wanted safeguards in place if anything unusual happened after his death. Near the end of the letter he wrote one sentence that sent a chill through me. If Nicole ever insists that paperwork cannot wait, remember that no legal document worth signing becomes less valid because you read it carefully. I slowly lowered the letter. He mentioned Nicole by name. Thomas sighed. Only once. He hoped he was mistaken. My eyes shifted toward the flash drive. What's on this? Thomas reached across the desk and inserted it into his office computer. After entering a password, a video recording appeared. William sat in the very chair where I now faced the screen. He looked thinner than I remembered, but his eyes remained sharp. If you're watching this, Evie, he began with a tired smile, then my instincts were probably right. He explained that during one family dinner, he had overheard Nicole asking detailed questions about ownership structures, emergency authorizations, and survivor rights while believing he had stepped outside to answer a phone call. At the time, he dismissed it as curiosity. Later, he discovered someone had searched through his home office while he was at a doctor's appointment. Nothing had been stolen, but important files had been moved. Maybe it's nothing, William said into the camera. Maybe I'm just an old contractor who's spent too many years expecting problems before they arrive. But if it isn't nothing, promise me one thing. Read every page. Ask every question. And never confuse pressure with love. The recording ended. Neither Thomas nor I spoke immediately. Finally, he unfolded the legal memorandum. William instructed me to prepare additional protections. Certain assets cannot legally be transferred without direct confirmation from you inside my office, regardless of any outside documents. Relief mixed with sadness inside me. William had continued protecting me even after his death. As I gathered the papers back into the envelope, Thomas looked at me with quiet concern. There's one more thing you should know. I met his eyes. Yesterday morning, he said carefully, someone called my office pretending to be you. They wanted to know whether any sealed estate documents still existed. When my assistant refused to answer, they hung up immediately. Did you recognize the voice? I asked. Thomas shook his head slowly. No, but the caller made one mistake. What mistake? He slid a yellow legal pad across the desk. Written on it were 4 words copied from the phone conversation. She said, "It's urgent," before she signs. I stared at the sentence for several long seconds. It was almost identical to the pressure Nicole had placed on me at Daniel's birthday party. At that moment, I understood something that frightened me more than the forged signature at the bank. None of this had been improvised. Someone had been planning every step long before that silver envelope ever appeared beside my son's birthday cake. That I drove home from Thomas Reed's office with William's letter resting inside my purse like it was still carrying the weight of his hand. By the time I reached my driveway, the afternoon sun had settled low behind the maple trees, casting long shadows across the front lawn William had cared for every Saturday morning without fail. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and stood quietly in the entryway. For the first time since William died, I didn't feel alone in the house. His words echoed too clearly in my mind. Honest people welcome questions. Dishonest people rush signatures. If someone had spent months preparing this scheme, then reacting emotionally would only help them. I needed patience. That evening Daniel called. His voice sounded almost casual. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Everything okay?" "I'm doing fine," I answered warmly. "Just a little tired." Nicole was worried you might still be upset about the birthday misunderstanding. I smiled to myself even though he couldn't see it. There's nothing to worry about. I deliberately kept my voice soft. Maybe I overreacted. There was a brief silence before Daniel replied with noticeable relief. I'm glad to hear that. We spoke another few minutes about ordinary things. The weather, Tyler's baseball practice, grocery prices, and an upcoming church fundraiser. When the conversation ended, I realized something important. Daniel sounded less like a man hiding a secret than a man repeating someone else's version of events. Whether he knew everything or not, I still couldn't tell. The following week I began doing something that felt strangely unnatural. I stopped correcting Nicole. Whenever she insisted on helping me, I thanked her. When she offered to organize paperwork, I told her I'd think about it. If she hinted that I seemed forgetful, I laughed instead of defending myself. It wasn't pleasant pretending to be more confused than I really was, but William had often said that people revealed themselves more clearly when they believed they were already winning. On Wednesday afternoon, Nicole stopped by unexpectedly carrying soup from a local cafe. I figured you shouldn't cook for one, she said cheerfully as she walked into my kitchen. That's thoughtful, I replied. She looked around the room before her eyes settled on the stack of unopened mail beside the refrigerator. You haven't gone through your bills yet. Not yet, I answered, deliberately sounding distracted. Some days I lose track. She smiled sympathetically. That happens. Then, almost too naturally, she reached toward the envelopes. Would you like me to sort them for you? If you don't mind. I watched carefully without appearing to watch at all. She separated the utility bill from 2 advertisements. Then one plain white envelope caught her attention. She read the return address for less than a second before quietly slipping it beneath the grocery flyer she had brought with the soup. She thought I hadn't noticed. I said nothing. After she left, I lifted the grocery flyer. The hidden envelope came from First Federal Bank. It hadn't disappeared after all. She had only been deciding whether it should. I placed it back exactly where she had left it until evening, then opened it after locking the front door. Inside was nothing alarming, only my monthly account summary. But one line near the bottom caught my attention. An inquiry had been made regarding expanded authorization privileges only 3 weeks earlier. The request had been denied because additional verification was required. Someone had already tried once. They simply hadn't succeeded. 2 days later, Daniel invited me over for Sunday dinner. Tyler wants to show you his science project, he said. I accepted. Family dinners had always mattered to me, and despite everything, I refused to surrender ordinary moments without certainty. Their dining room looked exactly as it had on Daniel's birthday. Nicole greeted me warmly, perhaps even more warmly than usual. During dinner, the conversation drifted from football to holiday travel plans. Then Nicole casually said, Daniel and I have been talking about how difficult it must be for you to manage such a large house by yourself. I nodded. Some days are busier than others. You know, she continued while passing the mashed potatoes, there are wonderful retirement communities nearby. Maintenance-free. Safe. You'd never have to worry about repairs again. Before I could answer, Tyler spoke up. Grandma likes her house. Nicole smiled at him patiently. Of course she does, sweetheart. But sometimes adults have to make practical decisions. I noticed Daniel avoiding my eyes. We're only thinking ahead, Mom, he added quietly. Nothing has to happen right away. I appreciate your concern, I replied. I'll let you know if I ever decide to move. Nicole gave a polite smile, but disappointment flickered across her face for just a fraction of a second. After dinner, Tyler asked me to help him build a model volcano in the family room while the adults cleaned the kitchen. We worked together for nearly 20 minutes, laughing as glue stuck to our fingers. Then Tyler suddenly frowned. Grandma. Yes. Dad and Mom were talking about your house last week. I looked at him gently. What did they say? He shrugged innocently. I wasn't supposed to hear. Mom said once you sign everything, it'll finally be over. The room seemed to grow very still. Before I could ask another question, Tyler added, Dad didn't answer. He just kept staring at the table. A moment later, Nicole called from the kitchen. Tyler, dessert's ready. He jumped up and ran toward her without another thought. I remained seated beside the half-finished volcano, staring at the tiny bottle of white glue in my hand. Those few innocent words carried more weight than any accusation. Children rarely understood the importance of adult conversations, which was exactly why they sometimes repeated the truth without realizing it. As I quietly placed the glue back into the box, I made a decision. If Nicole believed I was becoming forgetful, uncertain, and easy to guide, I would let her keep believing it a little longer. Sometimes the safest place to uncover the truth is behind an opponent's confidence that you have already stopped paying attention. The following Tuesday, Nicole called just after breakfast. Her voice sounded brighter than usual, almost celebratory. "Evelyn, I have wonderful news. Daniel finally scheduled an appointment with an estate planning specialist. Since we're already updating our own family documents, we thought it would be smart to organize yours at the same time. It will save everyone so much trouble in the future." I stirred my coffee slowly before answering. That sounds sensible. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, as though she hadn't expected me to agree so easily. "Really?" she asked. "Of course," I replied. "At my age, it's probably time to get everything in order." "Perfect," she said quickly. "We'll pick you up Friday morning." After we hung up, I reached for the business card Thomas Reed had given me. He answered before the second ring. I explained everything Nicole had told me. He listened without interrupting. "Go," he said calmly when I finished. "Attend the meeting exactly as they expect. But don't sign anything until I arrive." "How will you know when?" I asked. "I've already spoken with the county recorder's office and the bank investigators. If the documents are legitimate, no one should object to another attorney reviewing them. If someone does object," he let the sentence trail away. We both understood the rest. Friday morning arrived cool and clear. Daniel drove while Nicole sat beside him. She greeted me with unusual warmth, complimenting my sweater and insisting on carrying my purse to the car. During the drive, she chatted about Tyler's school fundraiser, neighborhood improvements, and holiday shopping. The conversation felt almost rehearsed, carefully avoiding any mention of legal paperwork. The office building stood in a newly developed business park on the north side of Columbus. A polished brass directory listed several financial firms, insurance agencies, and legal practices. Nicole led the way confidently, as though she had already visited several times before. Inside the conference room, a middle-aged man wearing an expensive navy suit stood to greet us. "Mrs. Harper, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Richard Lawson." His handshake was firm but brief. Thick folders already rested neatly on the conference table. Daniel pulled out a chair for me while Nicole sat directly beside me, close enough to glance at every page. Richard smiled professionally. "Today's meeting is simply about simplifying future decisions. Nothing complicated." He opened the first folder and began explaining healthcare directives, emergency contacts, and routine estate planning. Everything sounded perfectly reasonable. Several forms required only initials confirming I had received informational copies. I placed my initials where appropriate after reading each page carefully. Nicole appeared relaxed. Then Richard reached the final packet. Unlike the others, these pages were clipped together separately with bright blue tabs marking signature lines. "These documents," he explained, "would authorize certain financial decisions should you become unable to manage your own affairs." Nicole leaned toward me. "Exactly what we've been talking about. It protects you." I adjusted my glasses and began reading every paragraph. The room grew noticeably quieter. Richard cleared his throat once. Nicole smiled politely, but tapped one finger against the tabletop. Daniel checked his watch. Finally, Nicole laughed softly. "Evelyn, honestly, you don't have to read every single page." Richard explained everything. I looked up and smiled. William always insisted that I should. Her expression tightened for only a second. "Of course. Take your time." I continued reading. Buried deep within the legal language was a clause granting immediate authority over property transactions once two physicians certified diminished capacity. Another page named Daniel as primary agent. A second page listed Nicole as successor with broad independent authority if Daniel became unavailable for any reason. My heartbeat remained steady. The language was more carefully written than the documents I had glimpsed at the birthday party, but the destination appeared remarkably similar. Richard slid a pen toward me. "Whenever you're ready." I picked it up. Nicole relaxed visibly. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Without saying a word, I signed the first document only, the acknowledgement confirming I had attended the consultation. Then I calmly set the pen down. Nicole blinked. "There are still several signatures left." "Yes," I replied pleasantly. "Those require my attorney." Richard frowned slightly. "Your attorney?" Before anyone else could speak, the conference room door opened. Thomas Reed stepped inside carrying a slim leather briefcase. Good morning, he said evenly. I hope I'm not interrupting. Nicole's face lost its color almost instantly. Daniel looked genuinely confused. Mr. Reed? What are you doing here? Thomas closed the door behind him. Representing my client, Mrs. Evelyn Harper. Richard stood. This is a private meeting. Thomas smiled politely. Then you'll have no objection to another licensed attorney reviewing the documents before they're signed. Richard hesitated just long enough to answer the question without speaking. Thomas placed several certified copies onto the conference table. Incidentally, he continued, Mrs. Harper's estate already contains protective provisions that make portions of these documents legally ineffective unless executed through my office. Nicole stared at him without saying a word. Daniel looked from Thomas to me, then back toward Richard. What does that mean? He asked quietly. Thomas opened one of Richard's packets and turned directly to the clause I had already noticed. It means these forms would not accomplish what someone apparently expected them to accomplish. The room fell completely silent. At that exact moment, another knock sounded at the conference room door. Richard looked toward it with visible uncertainty. Before anyone could respond, the door opened once more. Melissa Grant from First Federal Bank stepped inside beside a uniformed bank security investigator carrying a sealed evidence envelope. I watched Nicole's eyes widen as she recognized them immediately, and for the first time since Daniel's birthday, I realized she no longer believed she was controlling the conversation. Melissa Grant placed the sealed evidence envelope on the conference table without a trace of emotion. The bank security investigator remained quietly beside her, his expression professional and unreadable. Daniel looked completely bewildered. Can somebody please tell me what's going on? He asked, looking first at me, then at Nicole, then at Thomas Reed. No one answered immediately. Thomas gently folded his hands. Daniel, before anyone says another word, I'd like everyone in this room to understand that Mrs. Harper has not accused anyone of a crime. We are simply here to establish facts. Richard Lawson shifted uneasily in his chair. This meeting is no longer appropriate. Actually, Melissa replied calmly. It's become very appropriate. She opened the envelope and removed several certified copies of banking records. 5 weeks ago, First Federal Bank received documents requesting expanded authority over Mrs. Harper's financial accounts. Those documents contained a signature that our investigation has determined was not executed by Mrs. Harper. Daniel slowly turned toward me. Mom, is that true? I nodded quietly. Yes. He looked genuinely shaken. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know who already knew. Those words seemed to strike him harder than any accusation could have. Melissa laid a color photograph onto the table. It was the same security image she had shown me at the bank. The unidentified woman wearing sunglasses stood at the customer service desk, while Nicole waited just behind her. Daniel stared at the photograph for several long seconds before lifting his eyes toward his wife. Nicole. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Nicole folded her arms tightly. That picture proves absolutely nothing. It proves you were present, Melissa answered evenly. Nothing more, nothing less. Richard stood and began gathering his briefcase. I believe this meeting should end immediately. Thomas looked at him. Before you leave, Mr. Lawson, perhaps you'd like to explain why these estate documents were prepared without consulting Mrs. Harper's existing attorney, despite clear instructions already on file. Richard hesitated. I was retained by my clients. Which clients? Thomas asked. Richard remained silent. Daniel's breathing became noticeably heavier. Nicole, he said slowly, what is all this? She looked directly at him. I was trying to protect our family. By taking Mom to another attorney? Daniel asked. By hiding paperwork. She shook her head impatiently. You're making this sound worse than it is. I reached into my purse and quietly removed William's sealed letter. May I show everyone something? The room fell silent again. I unfolded the final page and slid it across the table toward Daniel. Your father wrote this before he died. Daniel recognized William's handwriting immediately. I watched his face change as he silently read the paragraph mentioning pressure, rushed signatures, and the importance of asking questions. When he reached the sentence containing Nicole's name, he stopped reading. Dad wrote this? He asked. Thomas answered softly. I witnessed him write every word. Nicole's confidence began to crack for the first time. William was sick, she said quickly. People imagine things when they're dying. I met her eyes calmly. Then perhaps you'll explain something else. From my purse, I removed another folder Thomas had given me after reviewing William's files. Inside were printed copies of email messages. These were recovered from your archived correspondence with Green Valley Property Group. Nicole's face instantly lost all expression. Daniel frowned. What's Green Valley? Thomas answered before anyone else could. A real estate investment company. I handed the first page to Daniel. The subject line read, Preliminary Valuation After Ownership Transition. Daniel's eyes moved rapidly across the page. Another email followed. Then another. None of them explicitly described fraud, but together they painted a very clear picture. Nicole had been discussing market values, expected sale timelines, renovation costs, and projected profits. On my house nearly 6 months earlier. One message contained a sentence Daniel read aloud without realizing it. Once ownership issues are finalized, the property can be listed immediately. His voice broke halfway through the sentence. Nicole. She reached toward him. Let me explain. He pulled his hand away. Were you planning to sell Mom's house? We talked about possibilities. 6 months ago? Daniel asked quietly. Before she ever mentioned moving? Nicole didn't answer. The silence became answer enough. Just then another voice came from near the doorway. Actually, there's something else. Everyone turned. An older gentleman stepped inside carrying a leather portfolio. Thomas stood. Mr. Collins. Thank you for coming. Daniel looked confused. Who is he? Frank Collins. The man introduced himself. Licensed insurance investigator. He opened his portfolio and removed a timeline summarizing several financial inquiries connected to my property over the previous year. Mrs. Harper's homeowner's insurance policy received multiple valuation requests through authorized third-party channels. Daniel looked puzzled. What does that mean? Frank answered calmly. Someone repeatedly requested estimated replacement values, structural assessments, and market projections. Those requests usually occur before refinancing or selling a property. Daniel slowly lowered himself back into his chair. He looked exhausted, as though every answer created 2 more questions. Nicole suddenly stood. I'm done listening to this. She grabbed her handbag and headed toward the door. Nicole, Daniel called after her. She didn't stop. Before reaching the hallway, she turned only once. If you're all determined to believe the worst about me, there's nothing I can say. Then she walked out without another word. No one chased after her. The conference room remained completely still long after the door closed. Daniel sat staring at the emails spread across the table while turning his father's letter over in trembling hands. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and regret. Mom, he whispered. I honestly didn't know about any of this. I believed that he believed those words. But belief alone could not erase the months of silence, the unanswered questions, or the trust that had quietly slipped away long before that birthday card ever reached my hands. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. There were no dramatic confrontations on my front lawn, no angry shouting matches, and no satisfying speeches that magically repaired everything. Real families rarely heal that way. The bank completed its investigation, and because the suspicious documents had never actually been accepted or used to transfer authority, the matter became one for attorneys rather than headlines. Thomas Reed worked closely with the bank to strengthen every protection surrounding my accounts and my property. Every signature now required in-person verification through his office, just as William had intended years earlier. It wasn't about punishment. It was about making sure no one could ever mistake my trust for permission again. Daniel called several times during those first few weeks, but I wasn't ready to answer. I needed silence more than explanations. One chilly Saturday morning, I found him sitting on my front porch when I returned from the farmer's market. He stood the moment he saw me, looking older than I remembered only a month before. There were dark circles beneath his eyes, and the confidence he usually carried had disappeared. Mom, he said quietly. Can we talk? I unlocked the front door without answering immediately. Finally, I nodded. Come inside. We sat at the same kitchen table where William and I had planned birthdays, anniversaries, and retirement dreams. Daniel wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee, but barely touched it. Nicole moved into her sister's apartment, he said after several minutes of silence. She says she needs time. I simply listened. I hired my own attorney, he continued. They've been reviewing everything. He swallowed hard before meeting my eyes. You were right to ask questions. I should have asked them too. I looked at my son for a long moment before speaking. Daniel, This was never about proving I was right. He lowered his head. I know. Tears filled his eyes. The hardest part isn't finding out what Nicole did. It's realizing how easily I dismissed you when you tried to protect yourself. That sentence hurt more than everything that had happened before it because it was true. I reached across the table and gently placed my hand over his. You weren't a little boy anymore, Daniel. I couldn't make you listen, but I hoped you would. He nodded slowly. Dad would be disappointed in me. He'd also expect you to learn from it. I answered. We talked for nearly 3 hours that afternoon. Not every question had an answer. Some never would. Daniel admitted he had trusted Nicole with nearly every financial decision because he believed sharing responsibility was part of a healthy marriage. He had never read many of the emails she sent or received because he assumed they reflected ordinary household business. Trust, I realized, can blind honest people just as easily as it can be abused by dishonest ones. Before leaving, Daniel reached into his coat pocket and handed me a birthday card. A real birthday card this time. Inside he had written only a few lines. I'm sorry I forgot that my first responsibility was to protect my mother the way she spent her whole life protecting me. I closed the card without speaking because no sentence could erase the past, but sincere regret deserved to be acknowledged. Several months later, I made a decision that surprised almost everyone. I sold the house William and I had shared for more than 40 years. Not because anyone forced me, not because I had lost it, because I was finally ready. Every room held beautiful memories, but I realized those memories belonged to us, not to the walls surrounding them. With Thomas's help, I established the William Harper Skilled Trade Scholarship, providing annual financial assistance to young men and women attending vocational schools across Ohio. William always believed that honest work could change a person's life. It felt right that his name would continue opening doors instead of closing them. I moved into a smaller cottage in a peaceful 55-plus community about 20 minutes away. The house required less maintenance, overlooked a small lake, and came with neighbors who gathered every Friday evening to share homemade desserts and stories about grandchildren. For the first time in years, my decision belonged entirely to me. Daniel visits often now. Tyler still insists I make pecan pie on his birthday, and we laugh every time he reminds me not to sign anything before reading it. It has become our family joke, though underneath the laughter sits a lesson none of us will ever forget. As for Nicole, I truly don't know what the future holds for her. I stopped following that chapter because carrying bitterness would only allow it to keep living inside me. Forgiveness doesn't always mean restoring trust. Sometimes it simply means refusing to let someone else's choices continue writing your story. Looking back, I often think about that silver envelope on Daniel's birthday. Everyone believed the most important signature was the one they wanted from me. They were wrong. The most important signature was the one I refused to give before understanding the truth. That single decision protected everything William had worked for, reminded my son what integrity really looks like, and gave me something even more valuable than a house or a bank account. It gave me back my own voice. Thank you for spending this time with me and listening to my story. If it meant something to you, I'd be honored if you subscribed and join me for more stories like this. Take care of yourself, take your time before trusting any signature, and I'll see you again in the next story.